Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey Herman and Corin, we've had some episodes before talking about electric vehicles and the idea that we can move to fully car-free societies. I've shared my view that I think that electric vehicles, as nice as they are but a stopgap in our eventual necessary move towards being totally car-free. That's my opinion. So it's besides the fact that I don't think I'll ever be able to afford an electric vehicle, at least unless I stop buying these delightful monitor mounts I'm looking at and other tech paraphernalia that is just more fun for me. But I think that if we're talking about our roads are too full of cars, we might have to accept that it's not actually feasible for everyone to move around in their own personal vehicle. It's not a compromise, societal compromise I think anyone's too excited about, but that's my prediction anyway. So if that is the ultimate trajectory of how we change the way we move people and everyone and freight around the world, then we have to think about public transport. We talked before about some of my grievances around how that's done here in Israel, but more germane to this conversation I think is the idea of autonomous public transport. We hear so much about self-driving cars and self-driving vehicles, and so little about the idea of self-driving buses, the backbone of public transport. So there's two things I'd love to chat about, Herman and Corin, that I've always wondered about in this kind of domain. The first is precisely that. If we're talking about forms of public transport that are the most amenable to fully automated movement, whether that is rail or buses, and we're talking about, we've been on these self-driving trains in between shuttles and airports, so there's proofs of concept that it works or can work, but are there proofs of concept anywhere in the world where self-driving buses are actually operating at scale for inter or intra-city transit? Or other forms of transport. And that's why I leave it open, because maybe the bus is just a road transport is less ideal than the train, where you've got maybe some more, it's easier to stand that up than it is trams and things like that, where it's on a fixed path. The second question, Herman and Corin, in this context is, I've always wondered, when we're talking about self-driving anything, and we have many of these on the road potentially, and we have the need for collision avoidance naturally. A lot of the technology and development focuses on vision-based technologies, getting cameras that can see and understand the frames of what they're seeing as it happens and taking action based on that. But what about the idea of a network, a mesh network, in which every moving vehicle, bus, car, especially in a public transit system, is a node, and the devices can talk to one another such that they don't crash into one another. So instead of having vision-based approaches, or maybe in addition to it, we can have moving cars and buses that are actually coordinating, saying, I'm braking sharply, you start braking sharply to avoid crashing into me, and pileups are avoided because there's actually a relay. Now, we'd have to think about what kind of network could work for that, and how it would fare in poor environmental conditions. But I'm sure someone's thought of the idea, and not only of this, but even of all the traffic lights and signals and all these things we have around us to control manually the flow of traffic. Could those be integrated into this network such that the stop signal isn't a physical light, it's a networking node that tells the vehicles in front of it to prepare to stop at this exact point, and then that node propagates. I know it's kind of a wacky idea. Trust me, I'm not on any drugs as I recall this, as I send this in, but I'm wondering if this concept has been explored in any major system, and if it would be feasible, and if so, what kind of network might we need to actually make this work. Herman and Corin, let's explore my futuristic vision of public transport, in which we have vehicles as nodes, and road control entirely network-based instead of physical.
Welcome back to my weird prompts. I am Corn, and I am joined, as always, by my brother, the man who once tried to network our toaster to the neighbor's garage door opener just to see if he could.
Herman Poppleberry, at your service. And for the record, Corn, that toaster experiment, was a foundational study in local mesh networking. It just happened to result in a very burnt bagel and a very confused neighbor.
Well, today's prompt from Daniel is significantly more sophisticated than your kitchen-based chaos. Daniel is looking at the big picture of human movement. He is arguing that electric vehicles are just a stopgap, a temporary band-aid on our way to a fully car-free society. He wants to dive into autonomous public transport and the idea of a massive, citywide vehicular mesh network.
It is a timely one, Corn. We are sitting here in February of 2026, and the conversation around mobility has shifted so rapidly in just the last 18 months. Daniel's point about electric vehicles being a stopgap is something we are seeing play out in urban planning offices all over the world right now. The EV honeymoon phase is starting to wane as people realize that a traffic jam of electric cars is still, at the end of the day, a traffic jam.
It is a bold take, though. For the last decade, we have been told the electric vehicle is the endgame. It was the solution to the climate crisis, the answer to urban pollution, the savior of the American driveway. But Daniel is arguing that even if every single car on the road is electric, we still have a fundamental geometry problem. Too many metal boxes, not enough space, and the massive resource cost of personal ownership for 8 billion people.
He is spot on about the geometry. Think about it this way. A standard parking space is about 180 square feet. In a city like Los Angeles, there are an estimated 18 million parking spaces. That is a staggering amount of real estate dedicated to stationary pieces of metal. Whether those pieces of metal run on gasoline or lithium-ion batteries doesn't change the fact that they are taking up space where people could be living, working, or planting trees. And then you have the resource trap. To transition the entire global fleet to EVs, we would need to mine more lithium, cobalt, and copper in the next 20 years than we have in the last 2,000.
So, if the EV is just the bridge, what is on the other side? Daniel points toward autonomous public transport, or APT. We have spent decades obsessed with the individual self-driving car, the robotaxi, that takes you from your door to your office in solitary comfort. But Daniel is suggesting the real efficiency gains happen when you automate the backbone of the city, the buses, the shuttles, and the light rail.
Exactly. The robotaxi model actually risks making traffic worse because it encourages more deadhead miles, cars driving around empty waiting for a fare. But APT, that is about high capacity throughput. So, to Daniel's first question, what is actually happening at scale? Are there real-world proofs of concept where this isn't just a pilot program with 2 shuttles in a retirement community?
I think people assume this is still future tech, but the scale in certain parts of the world is already massive.
It really is. If you look at China, specifically Shenzhen and Beijing, they have moved past the experimental phase. Shenzhen already has the world's first fully electric bus fleet, over 16,000 buses, and now they are layering on what they call the National Vehicle Road Cloud Initiative. They aren't just testing one bus, they are testing entire corridors where the buses communicate with the road infrastructure to maintain perfect intervals. They call it platooning. Imagine 5 buses traveling inches apart at 40 miles per hour, acting like a virtual train.
I remember reading about the ART system, Autonomous Rail Rapid Transit. It is basically a trackless tram, right?
Precisely. It was developed by the CRRC Juzhou Institute. It looks like a sleek, modern tram, and it can carry 300 to 500 people, but it doesn't need steel rails. It runs on rubber tires and follows virtual tracks painted on the road using optical sensors and LiDAR. They have these running in several Chinese cities like Zhuzhou and Yibin, and they just started testing a version called SART, or Super Autonomous Rapid Transit, in places like Lahore, Pakistan, and even parts of Australia. The goal there is to provide the capacity of a subway at a fraction of the infrastructure cost because you aren't digging tunnels or laying steel rails. You are just digitizing the existing asphalt.
That covers the intracity piece, getting around within the urban core. But Daniel also asked about intercity transit. That seems like a much harder nut to crack because of the higher speeds and the sheer unpredictability of highway traffic.
Intercity is definitely the frontier, but the scale there is actually being driven by freight. There is a project on Interstate 35 between Laredo and Dallas where autonomous truck fleets from companies like Aurora and Kodiak Robotics are starting trial operations at scale. The logic is that if you can prove a 40-ton semi-truck can navigate a 500-mile highway stretch safely, a long-distance coach bus is the next logical step.
It's the follow the leader model.
Exactly. In Europe, the SHOW project, which stands for Shared Automation Operating Models for Worldwide Adoption, has been running pilot sites in 20 cities across the continent. They are looking at how these autonomous buses handle everything from the narrow cobblestone streets of Graz to high-speed intercity links. We are seeing a shift where the bus driver is becoming a mission commander who oversees a fleet of 3 or 4 autonomous coaches traveling in a convoy. It reduces drag, saves energy, and increases the density of the highway.
It feels like the technology is there, but the at-scale part is still heavily dependent on the city's willingness to push out human drivers, which leads into Daniel's second big idea, the mesh network. He's imagining a system where every vehicle and every traffic light is a node. Herman, we've talked about V2X, vehicle to everything before, but how close are we to a true mesh?
We are closer than most people realize, but the terminology is important here. What Daniel is describing is essentially CV to X cellular vehicle to everything. For a long time, the industry was split between DSRC, which is a dedicated short-range communication based on Wi-Fi, and the cellular version. As of 26, CV to X has essentially won the war. The FCC in the US and the regulators in the EU have cleared the way for the 5.9 GHz band to be used specifically for this.
Why did the cellular version win? Was it just a matter of 5G coverage?
It's more about the sidelink capability. This is the mesh Daniel is talking about. CV to X allows for direct communication between devices, car to car, car to light, car to light, car to pedestrian, without needing to go up to a cell tower and back down. That is the PC5 interface. If a bus 100 yards ahead hits its brakes because a dog ran into the road, it sends a broadcast packet directly to every car behind it. That happens in less than 10 milliseconds. To put that in perspective, a human reaction time is about 250 milliseconds on a good day. The mesh is 25 times faster than your brain.
Right, so the mesh becomes a collective nervous system for the road. But Daniel's specific point was about the traffic signals themselves acting as nodes. He's suggesting we might not even need physical lights eventually.
That is the Day 1 deployment district concept. Atlanta actually launched one of these in late 2025. They have a 3-mile round-trip route where the shuttles and the traffic lights are at a constant state of negotiation. The light doesn't just turn green because a timer went off, it turns green because the autonomous bus requested preemption to stay on schedule. In a true mesh, the light is just a data packet. You could have an intersection where cars from 4 different directions all arrive at once and they don't stop. They just adjust their speeds by 2 or 3 miles per hour so they weave through each other with inches to spare. It's called slot-based intersections.
I want to push on that, because it sounds terrifying. If the light is just a data packet, what happens to the human-driven car? This is the mixed traffic problem you always bring up. If I'm driving my old 2010 Toyota that doesn't have a V2X node, am I just a blind spot in the network?
That is the single biggest hurdle to Daniel's vision. In a 100% autonomous environment, the efficiency is godlike. But the moment you add one unpredictable human who decides to change lanes without signaling or who gets distracted by a text, the whole system has to revert to a much more conservative stop-and-go model. The mesh is only as strong as its weakest link.
So, is the answer retrofitting? Daniel mentioned every vehicle acting as a node. Can we just stick a box on a 20-year-old car and call it a day?
Actually, yes. Companies like Denso and Comsignia launched aftermarket V2X solutions last year. You can buy an onboard unit, or OBU, that plugs into your car's OBD2 port and broadcasts your position, velocity, and heading. But for the network to be feasible for collision avoidance, you need a high penetration rate. If only 30% of cars are on the mesh can't guarantee safety. You need something like 95% before you can start removing physical signals. That is why some cities are discussing V2X mandates, similar to how we mandated seat belts or backup cameras.
Let's talk about the network requirements for a second. Daniel asked what kind of network would be required. If we are talking about every car in a city like Jerusalem or New York or London broadcasting its state 10 times a second, that is a massive amount of data. Is 5G actually enough?
It's not just about the G, it's about where the processing happens. This is where edge computing becomes the hero of the story. You don't want a central server in a different state trying to coordinate an intersection in downtown Jerusalem. The brain has to live in the roadside units, the RSS, us mounted on the poles where the traffic lights used to be.
So the pole is the server.
Exactly. The pole gathers the data from the 50 cars in its immediate vicinity, runs the coordination algorithm, and broadcasts the instructions back. We are talking about sub-10 millisecond latency requirements. 5G Advanced is the current baseline, but the industry is already looking at 6G for the late 2020s because it offers even higher reliability and centimeter-level positioning. You need a network that doesn't just have high bandwidth, but extremely high determinism. You need to know with 100% certainty that the packet will arrive on time. In a mesh network, a dropped packet could mean a dropped bumper.
And what about the mesh pod where cars talk to each other without the pole? If two cars are on a collision course on a rural road with no infrastructure, can the mesh save them?
That is the V2V or vehicle-to-vehicle layer. That is already operational in many high-end vehicles from Cadillac, Audi, and Ford. The cars use that 5.9 GHz band to talk directly. It's like a digital shout. I am here, I am going this fast, and I am turning left. If the other car's ears are open, it can calculate the collision risk and override the driver. It's called collective perception. One car's sensors see a patch of black ice, and it tells every other car within a mile to adjust their traction control.
It sounds incredible, but it also sounds like a cybersecurity nightmare. If every car is a node and they are all listening to each other's shouts to make life or death decisions, how do you prevent someone from spoofing a ghost car or sending a braking signal to an entire highway just for fun?
You have hit on the most sensitive part of the architecture. The entire system relies on something called the Public Key Infrastructure, or PKI. Every message sent by a vehicle or a traffic light has to be digitally signed with a certificate that proves it's a legitimate, registered device. These certificates are rotated frequently, sometimes every few minutes, to prevent tracking and spoofing.
But we've seen how even secure systems can be compromised. Remember the ransomware attack on Pittsburgh Regional Transit's rail system back in 2024? That wasn't even a mesh network, and it still paralyzed the schedule.
Right, and that is a massive concern. In a mesh network, the attack surface is huge. Every car is a potential entry point. The industry is currently working on misbehavior detection algorithms. Basically, the network uses a consensus model. If one car is shouting, "I'm braking," but its neighbor's sensors see it moving at 60 miles per hour, the network flags that node as compromised and ignores its data. It's like a neighborhood watch for data packets.
It's like a blockchain for traffic.
I knew you'd go there. But in a sense, yes. It's a decentralized ledger of truth about where things are in physical space. If the majority of nodes agree that the road is clear, one rogue node can't easily trick the system into stopping.
Let's go back to Daniel's EV as a stopgap thesis. If we have this perfect mesh and these autonomous buses, do we even need personal cars? Or is the car-free society more of a personal car-free society where we still use cars, but they are all shared autonomous pods?
That is the mobility as a service, or MaaS model. We've seen cities like Helsinki and Berlin really lean into this with apps like Wim or Jelby. The idea is that you don't own a car, you own a subscription to the city's movement network. Maybe a small autonomous shuttle like the ones from Holon or Beep picks you up at your door for the first mile and drops you at the autonomous rapid transit hub. It's about multimodal efficiency.
I think the psychological barrier is the biggest one there. People love the freedom of their own car, even if that freedom mostly consists of sitting in traffic and paying for insurance and hunting for parking. But Daniel's point about affordability is real. He mentioned he can't afford an electric vehicle because he's busy buying monitor mounts and tech gear.
He's not alone. The total cost of ownership for a car is skyrocketing. Between insurance, maintenance, and the high cost of EV batteries, the freedom of the car is becoming an expensive cage. If a city can provide a mesh-coordinated, autonomous transit system that is faster, safer, and cheaper than owning a car, the economic argument will eventually win over the emotional one. We are already seeing this with Gen Z and Gen Alpha in megacities. They aren't getting driver's licenses because they don't need them. Their freedom is their smartphone and a reliable transit network.
So, what does the transition look like? If we agree EVs are the stopgap, how do we get to the car-free endgame? Is it a slow phasing out of parking spaces, or is it a big bang infrastructure shift?
It's already happening through tactical urbanism. Look at Paris under Mayor Hidalgo. They have removed thousands of parking spots and turned them into Velopolitane bike lanes and cafe seating. Barcelona has the superblocks, where they cut off through traffic to entire neighborhoods, forcing cars to stay on the perimeter. As the autonomous mesh becomes more reliable, cities will start designating AV-only zones. Once you have a zone where only mesh-connected autonomous vehicles can go, the efficiency of that zone will be so much higher. No traffic lights, no congestion, that people in the neighboring districts will demand it expand to them.
It's like the early days of the car itself. Cars were a nuisance until we built the roads for them and pushed the horses out. Now we are looking at pushing the human-driven cars out to make room for the mesh.
Exactly. And the mesh doesn't just help cars. Think about the pedestrians and cyclists. In a true V2X system, your smartphone is a node. If you are walking toward a crosswalk, your phone broadcasts a V2P, vehicle to pedestrian signal. The autonomous bus 3 blocks away already knows you are there and adjusts its speed so it doesn't even have to stop, it just glides past right after you cross. It's a frictionless city.
That is the invisible siren concept you mentioned earlier. I think they are doing that in the Netherlands with ambulances.
Yes, the Emergency Services Priority System. All ambulances in the Netherlands are now connected to a national digital alert network. When the ambulance is coming, it sends a digital siren to the dashboards of every car in its path. It doesn't just scream at you with a physical siren, it tells your car exactly which way to move to clear a path. That is the power of the mesh. It turns a chaotic collection of individuals into a coordinated swarm.
So, back to the feasibility. Daniel asked if it would be feasible and what kind of network we need. We've talked about 5G, edge computing, and PKI security. But what about the hardware of the city? Do we need to dig up every street to put in these roadside units?
Not necessarily. Most modern LED streetlights are already being replaced with smart versions that have power and mounting points for sensors. You can piggyback the V2X mesh on the existing lighting infrastructure. The biggest physical cost isn't the nodes, it's the sensors for the non-connected objects. If the mesh is going to be safe, it needs to see the dog that ran into the street or the kid on the skateboard who doesn't have a smartphone.
So the mesh isn't just vehicles, it's a total situational awareness of the street.
Precisely. The poles will have LiDAR and cameras that digitize the entire intersection and broadcast that world model to every vehicle. This is what we call collective perception messages, or CPMS. Your car doesn't just rely on its own cameras, it sees through the eyes of the traffic light and the car 3 vehicles ahead. It's like having a godlike view of the road at all times. It eliminates blind spots entirely.
It's fascinating, but I can already hear our listeners thinking about the privacy side. If the mesh knows where every car, phone, and person is in real time to coordinate movement, that is the ultimate surveillance state.
It is a massive trade-off, corn. The V2X standards include privacy-preserving measures like the temporary identifier system I mentioned. Your car doesn't broadcast, "This is Herman's car." It broadcasts, "I am node 742." And every 5 minutes it changes to node 918. But at the end of the day, for the system to work, it has to know exactly where a person is. Whether we can keep that data anonymous is the technical and political battleground of the next decade.
I think the takeaway for Daniel is that his weird vision is actually the baseline for urban planning in 2026. The EV as a stopgap isn't just a fringe theory. It's becoming the consensus because we simply can't fit 8 billion electric cars on the planet. The math doesn't work. The lithium doesn't work. The space doesn't work.
And the proofs of concept are moving fast. If you want to see the future, look at the Day 1 districts in Atlanta, the trackless trams in China, and the autonomous minibuses in Europe. We're moving from self-driving cars to cooperative transit networks. It's a shift from the ego of the individual driver to the ecosystem of the city.
Which honestly sounds a lot more relaxing. I'd much rather read a book on an autonomous bus that never hits a red light than navigate a traffic jam in my own eco-friendly electric car.
I think we'll get there sooner than people think. The technology is hitting its inflection point right now. Analysts are saying 2026 is the year the global autonomous fleet will start growing tenfold. We are at the start of the explosion.
Well, if you've been enjoying this deep dive into the future of how we move, we'd really appreciate a quick review on your podcast app. It helps more people find the show and join the conversation.
It really does. And if you have your own weird prompts about the future or anything else, we want to hear them.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com, where we have a contact form and an RSS feed for our subscribers. You can also reach us directly at show@myweirdprompts.com.
We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your audio fix.
This has been My Weird Prompts. Thanks to Daniel for the prompt that took us from monitor mounts to the death of the traffic light.
Until next time, keep your nodes connected and your latency low.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.